Hey, this is astrologer DK Brainerd back with the third video in my Chiron series. In this video, we're going to talk about how we can access Chiron's healing power. So if you haven't watched the other two videos, the first two, that'll give you some good background that I think is really helpful in taking a journey with the planet called the Wounded Healer. So Chiron always heals through awareness. That's sort of the number one bedrock thing you need to know about working with Chiron. And another way of saying this is that we can't heal anything until we realize there's something wrong. So Chiron, as we mentioned previously, it often is experienced as the wound that never heals or never seems to heal. It can heal, it does heal. And we're going to talk about how you can work with this amazing archetype to do that in your own life. So understanding Chiron in your natal horoscope is going to be really helpful in this journey. We're going to talk about in the coming videos how Chiron shows up in different houses, in the different signs, and maybe we'll get into some aspects to Chiron, but that's also a key thing to be aware of if you've got a good astrologer. If you don't, get in touch with me. I can definitely help you. Or if you've got some astrological know-how, you definitely want to pay attention to the aspects, because the planets in aspect to Chiron are definitely an integral part of the healing journey, and even knowing which modalities are going to be the most useful for you in working with Chiron. But before we get into that, in this video, we're going to talk about some general principles as far as healing with Chiron goes. So I've got five ways of focusing our awareness on healing with Chiron. And without further ado, let's jump right in. So number one, the Chiron wound always occurs in childhood. And we saw in the first two videos with Chiron's mythology that is a very consistent theme that shows up in the life of this magical centaur. And, astrologically, there's so many things we look at to determine what a planet symbolizes, especially when a new planetary body is discovered. And this one is time tested, that it always shows up in childhood. And one of the things that this tells us is that any form of good inner child work, inner child healing is going to be beneficial in working with Chiron. So I've done a lot of inner child work, both with myself and with my clients over the years. And, one of the things that we learn in doing that work is that we tend to, in the process of domestication or civilization or socialization, we tend to repress a lot of our experiences, our memories of what really happened in childhood. So some people will react to an abusive or neglectful childhood experience by idealizing the family, telling themselves, well, it wasn't really that bad. Other people may go to the opposite extreme and become, confrontational and antisocial and everything sucks. Either way, any of those extreme polarized reactions are ways of bypassing dealing with what actually happened, dealing with the residue or the internalized trauma energy that, if left alone, if untreated, if unworked with, will, over the course of a lifetime tend to create all sorts of problems, from physical illness, disease, to emotional issues, to issues with lack, scarcity, relationships, self-sabotage. So Chiron shows us that we want to, that part of an essential part of healing is, in one way or another, getting in touch with that wounded inner child and healing and reintegrating the wounded inner child and the parts of soul that were split off through childhood abuse, childhood trauma. And I have to say, I concur with Alice Miller, the great Swiss psychologist, in saying that child abuse is basically child abuse is institutional. No one gets out unscathed. It's just kind of the way that we treat children. So I've written a lot about that on my website on cosmicfire.org. Cosmic Fire, my community artistic creative website, about the core toxic shame that we all get as part of our inheritance when we come into this world. So Chiron's really powerful at healing that, but you got to go there and be willing to do that work. So principle number 2, Saturn and Uranus. So Chiron's orbit, which we talked about his highly elliptical orbit in the first 2 videos, Chiron's orbit bridges the orbits of Saturn and Uranus. So this is an important distinction or clue to understanding how Chiron works. So Saturn and Uranus, Saturn is the archetype of structure, authority. You know, it can be very rigid, rules oriented. It's the material world. So Saturn is what gives us in the body. Saturn is the bones and the skin and the teeth. And, you know, so bones and teeth, these things that grow slowly and painfully, but enable us to have structure and to move around and to do things, right? That in and of itself is a fertile ground for meditation if you want to bring more awareness to your life and also work with Saturn on a more conscious level. Uranus is the outer planet of, I think of Uranus as the cosmic intelligence. So Uranus is innovation, newness, sudden, shocking, swift change. Uranus can change anything in an instant. Saturn says slow and steady wins the race. You got to learn the rules. You got to overcome your fears. You got to master your craft or your skills. You got to keep persevering, putting one foot in front of the other. And if you're willing to do that, you grow into being the authority or the author of your own life, and you will have success. And when Saturn's working well in our chart, it does tend to bring external validation in the material world, success, you know, successful people that can help us. Uranus is like, hey, man, we don't need to do these things in this old, stodgy, conservative, traditional way. There's a smarter, more, you know, next level, progressive way of doing this. So let's just blow up all the old stuff and tune into this, you know, radical new vibration. Uranus is very high vibratory energy, whereas Saturn is more the concrete energy of things manifesting over time in the material realm. Neither one's good, neither one's bad, at least not necessarily. But Chiron functions to integrate these two seemingly very polarized contraries, Saturn and Uranus. And for those of you that have any experience with the tarot, Uranus is usually symbolized as the Fool, the first card of the major arcana. Saturn is symbolized as the World, the last card of the major arcana. So one of my favorite astrologers, John Sandbach, who does the Omega Chandra symbols, he I think is friends with, but has had some kind of correspondence, working relationship, I believe, with Elias Lonsdale. And Elias said that he calls Chiron instead of Chiron Alpha Omega. And John Sandbach said, you know, I really see this as a better name for what this being is. And if you think of Alpha Omega, the Fool, the World, the beginning and the end, Chiron is actually the being that connects those two extremes. And, you know, a useful way of looking at this in the body is you could look at Chiron at Saturn as the spine, the spinal column, the bones of the spine. So that's what enables us to stand up straight and to not be like, amorphous blobs kind of blobbing around on the ground, right? Gives us structure. It gives us an internal system of authority. And Uranus is the descending channel of the Kundalini, esoterically. So Uranus symbolizes the nervous system, the brain sending electrical impulses down through the body that enables me to do this or smile. Well, that wasn't a very convincing smile, but how's that? Okay. So we need both, right? If you just have a spine, but the brain's disconnected from the body, you're not going to live very long. And if you just had a brain, but the spine is turned to mush, you're not going to live very long. And also, you're not going to be very productive. Chiron, you could think of as the cerebral spinal fluid. So this fluid that surrounds the, or is in the central channel of the spinal column, through which the nerves grow and, reach out, connect to other nerve networks throughout the body. So Chiron's like this fluid energy that enables those two systems, the electrical nervous system and the, more dense bone spinal system, to interface and to connect and to enable us to work the way that we're designed to work and to do the things that we want to do. So Chiron's very powerful archetype, as I've already said many times. And I feel like that's an interesting way of looking at it. And when we're building our awareness of what Chiron represents for us based on house sign placement in the natal chart, based on the aspects that are made to, that Chiron makes and that are made to Chiron. One of the places that we can, very fruitfully grow our awareness is by tuning into this imbalance that we all tend to gravitate, in certain situations more toward materialism, towards a very Saturnian approach. And then in other places, we may gravitate towards a Uranian approach. So when Uranus energy encounters the need to be slow and steady and persistent and follow rules and, do things step by step, that it can become very rebellious and very confrontational and create all of this like fire and lightning strike and explosions and drama, rather than actually just kind of buckling down and doing the work that's necessary. And on the contrary, if we get too stuck in Saturn, we're going to just be plodding along, never looking up to see, or never looking up internally, right? To tune into, hey, there's a better way of doing this. There's a way that's less painful, that's less plodding, that's less, just ground up in Saturnian type restrictions. So Chiron can really help us with that. And that's a great place to use your awareness to tune into, how am I working with Chiron? Let's tune into that centaur energy and bring these two sides, integrate these two polarities together so that I can be in the center. I can be in the center holding the space for both of those to exist and working with both of them, because Saturn and Uranus both very useful. So number 3, the human-animal divide. So we talked quite a bit about this in the first 2 videos, but Chiron, half horse, half man, a big part of the story of his wounding, his abandonment by his mother, and her repulsion at seeing his weird, hybrid form. Obviously, you don't fit in a lot of places if you're got the body of a horse and then the torso and head of a human. Chiron found his place by becoming this great healer, leader, teacher, warrior, guide character. But still, the part of the wounding in the myth is that even the other beings that were like him, the centaurs, weren't really like him. They're sort of tended to be more of these wild lunkus, characters. So that's a really great place to use the maxim that Chiron always heals through awareness, is to look at, how am I doing? Am I too stuck in my head? I just tuned in and asked that question. Yes, maybe not necessarily for me, but for most of society. We tend to live as disembodied egos, disembodied minds in our society. So, I could go on about that, or am I too stuck in my animal passions? Am I too, focused on gratifying my immediate cravings or desires? So that would be being too stuck in the physical. And again, I'm going to say most people are probably on the extreme of too stuck in the mental realm. And typically with this, Chiron wants us to, in order to really access the healing power of Chiron. And by the way, Chiron has the power, I believe, to heal everything in your chart. So it really is this redeemer character. He really is this redeemer character archetype. And I'm, not suggesting that you ignore everything else in your life, but if you want to maximize your healing journey, this archetype and this being is very, very powerful. So one of the ways that, we can work to integrate our animal side, and that's one of the biggest things that's, we're forced into repressing, or that's beaten into submission or starved into submission in childhood in a typical Western society domestication process, is that we are taught to be ashamed of our desires and to suppress our desires. And then luckily, there's this whole system of the world matrix parasitic infrastructure set up to distract us and to reward us for distracting, so whether it's, TV, online media, social media, all that stuff, it goes right into the brain, right? Gives you a dopamine hit in exchange for ignoring the needs of the body and the desires of the body. So, so much of the commercial framework of modern society is set up to make sure that we don't see the truth. And this is going back to point number one about the wound occurring in childhood. Make sure we don't see the truth of what happened to us in childhood, of how we were dissociated from our body and taught to fear and hate the body. And I'm not going to mention any big happenings in society in the last 3 years where, it became very en vogue to believe that we were all kind of these diseased, murderers walking around if we didn't do certain things. But that's definitely an outpicturing of the Chiron wound that, and I feel like Chiron showed up in 1977 so that we could, this is how crazy I am, right? That we could use him. It was like we were ready for this archetype to appear in our charts so that we could actually use his healing power, and because we would need it, moving forward from 1977. So, the human body, or the mental, physical divide, the human animal divide, Chiron's really great at helping us heal that. And some ways of working with that would be really aligned with, and in my experience with clients have really, really helped with this, would be somatic releasing, psychological body work, or body work that's any kind of body work, really, anything that brings us into our body and helps us to clear trauma from the body. So let's see if I had anything else on that. Yeah, all great ways of working with that. Principle number four is, and I hope I don't get in trouble for saying this, but homeopathy. So, Chiron considered to be the first homeopath. And this is very aligned with the Chiron energetic. So homeopathy says that the poison is also the cure, and so it uses extremely diluted, what do they call those things? Anyway, dilutions of, what if we took it and, just ate the plant might be very detrimental to us. But in order to cure, so like heals like, doctrine of sympathies and herbalism. Herbalism is great too. But, there's the homeopathy that you can get at Whole Foods, so arnica tablets or whatever. And then there's also the kind of homeopathy that's practiced, or that's done by skilled practitioners. And they work a lot of times with a lot more powerful doses. And from experience, I can tell you that it will definitely bring on a healing crisis if you get the right medicine in the right dose. But also the after effects tend to be really radical. And I've seen this with both of my kids. So, I would suggest, if you're going to follow that route, to do your research and find a good practitioner. Yeah, but definitely a Chiron sponsored, Chiron sort of validated healing modality. Number 5, working with Chiron as an archetypal being. So James Hillman, whom I talked about in the first couple of videos, said that the gods always want to be remembered. And when we're talking about gods, we're not talking about the Christian sense or even necessarily the Greek mythological sense, but we're talking about what I believe are living energetic beings that we call archetypes that interact with humans. And Hillman pointed out that these beings, when there's all this stuff, whether it's in the Bible or in other scriptures or in histories of how people sacrificing animals to the gods or doing all these kinds of crazy things to get the gods' favor. What Hillman points out is that they are giving attention to that archetype, and maybe at a sort of more Neolithic level of consciousness, although I don't know if that really existed in the way that we're told it existed. But, at a lower level of consciousness, it'd be like, oh, well, I got to kill this cow and burn it on an altar, to satiate the needs of Baal, the god of the Taurian age, Taurus cows, right? To satiate Baal's need for blood, and then Baal will favor us with a good harvest or whatever, right? So we don't have to do all of that. And in fact, I don't think that that's probably a very good thing to do, but we can give these archetypes our attention. So there are lots of ways of doing this. I've covered some of this in general principles in some of my astrology classes, but I'm just to keep this one somewhat short and sweet, I'm just going to give one example that is a really, really powerful way of honoring Chiron as an energetic being and developing a positive relationship with this alpha omega redeemer healer archetype. And that's handwriting. So if you think of Kairos, not in like my chosen name, Kiros, but chirotic, Chiron, Chiro. You have chiropractor, right? You have surgery, the French word for surgery, chirurgery, Chir. So all of these are ways of manipulating, doing things with the hands, healing with the hands. And I've found that writing is really, really powerful. And, if you activate your heart and your mind and say, hey, I'm going to do this writing, I'm going to do some journaling about this problem I have, this wound I have that I can't seem to heal. And I'm going to commit to a practice of journaling about it every morning, doing something like the morning pages from The Artist's Way by Julia Cameron. Very, very healing for me. I did those for years. And, that was the moment where I started to move out of this incredibly self-loathing, self-hating, unworthy, toxic, shame-laced mental paradigm that I spent, most of my 20s into becoming who I am today. This radiant, happy, beautiful being sharing the wisdom of the ages that I have to share with you. And so I firmly believe that this is such a powerful thing to do. And, typing doesn't work. Typing on your phone's not the same. I'm not saying that it couldn't help, but it's something about actually writing by hand is a really powerful way to access the alpha omega archetype of Chiron and to access Chiron's ability to heal your entire life. So I hope that you found those helpful, and I'll be back to talk about Chiron in the signs and houses. Until next time, this is astrologer DK Brainerd saying, if you like this, please like, comment, and subscribe. Tell your friends about it. Numbers help. And I want to share this with as many people as will use it. May you go with the stars.